We're already on to the 4th edition of the Seasonal Championship Gauntlet, and much like the 4th edition of Dungeons & Dragons, it's not my favorite. But today we're going to be taking Duckling's Guardians of the Ancient seasonal winning lineup from June of 2021 and seeing if I can prime glory in the Gauntlet with it in the modern day. With Empires of the Ascended, the previous seasonal, leaving a bad taste in everyone's mouth as the least diverse seasonal we'd ever had, Guardians of the Ancient really didn't offer much of a reprise. Azir Aurelia was the only deck to put more than 10 players into the top 32 and just barely did it at 11, but the rest of the decks in the meta were just nerfed versions of what we saw at Empires. Nasus, Aesol Demacia, TLC, Draven Ezreal, Lee Sin, Ruben Pile Deep. These decks were still taking top spots in this event, and it was Duckling that came through with a completely out of left field lineup that ended up winning the event, being the only Cytheria Matron player in the top 32, one of 2 Twisted Fate Fizz players, and one of 3 Frostbite Foundry players running back their Swiss lineup into the top 32. So now that you have the context of the meta, how out of left field Duckling's lineup was for what was essentially just more of the same from the Empire seasonal, let's talk about Duckling's deck lists and the changes that were made from when he won with this deck to when I will be playing it now. Now, this was not the first time that we had seen Cytheria Matron. It made waves in grassroots events earlier on in the Guardians of the Ancient season, but nobody ever really agreed on a finalized build for it, if Kindred or no champions was more correct, if we were supposed to be running Mobilize and Oblivious Islander and all these really all-in combo pieces, or if you wanted to go a little bit more mid-range for when you don't find the combo, but Duckling went balls to the wall, all in on the combo with the full package of Mobilize and Oblivious Islander, and decided to have no champions, making him the first champion with a no champion deck in a seasonal tournament, at least in the Americas, probably worldwide, but I didn't fact check that. But a couple of nerfs have happened to this deck, not necessarily because of this deck, but as a result of some of the other strong Shadow Isle decks in the meta, such as Cursed Keeper. Escaped Abomination has been nerfed from a 4-3 now down to a 4-2, so it'll die to a lot more than it used to. Sharpsight, of course, has been nerfed from +2/+2 to only +1/+2, though that is a more recent change. And of course, Stalking Shadows was nerfed as directly after this seasonal, though cited more for Nasus and other strong Shadow Isle strategies than this list specifically, now up to 3 mana instead of 2, so I'm going to be spending a little bit more there, but there's not a lot of spells in this deck, so I wasn't really using too much spell mana to begin with. Hopefully this won't bite me in the ass too much. Next up, we have the deck that I am easily the most worried about, and the best Teemo deck we've ever had, Frostbite Foundry. This deck was kept in the back of a lot of players' minds as they went into the top 32, as it was a great Lee Sin counter and had a lot of good selling points. Outside of that, Aikido would even go on to get second place at the next seasonal with this list, but most players saw it just as a top 32 deck, Duckling actually running it through the Swiss rounds, which is rather uncommon for the time, and this is just a deck that I never really meshed with, and since Bandle City came out, we really haven't seen it. Not a lot of buffs or nerfs have happened to this deck either. It really was just a very distinct meta call, and those meta calls are always the ones that I'm the most worried about just randomly getting smorched down on in the Gauntlet, especially as there's no healing. I might just randomly get gauntleted on, but as far as the changes that have happened, Ezreal has been nerfed. Actually went from 6 targets to 8 targets recently, but there was a slight compensation buff, I would say, in the play cast merge. Actually going to work out really well for me here, as now once I put the spells on the stack, Ezreal will deal damage to the enemy nexus. This is probably one of the worst lists for highlighting that, as a lot of my spells are going to be burst speed anyway, so that doesn't really matter for the play cast change, but I did want to go ahead and highlight that. Chump Lump has been buffed, actually got a 4th health point back rather recently after losing that not too long after beta, and Aftershock has been nerfed now, not hitting the Nexus, but being buffed up to 3 mana, and there were a couple of landmarks at the time, like I mentioned, Azir Aurelia was a rather popular deck, but for the most part, that last little bit of burn was kind of what I'd be hoping for in a Shroom deck, but like I said, not too many changes. This was just a hyper-specific meta call that we'll see if I can take it to a prime glory. And finally, we have the first 2-time list here in Twisted Fate Fizz. Now, when Duckling played this deck, it had already been nerfed considerably, which means I don't have to reiterate as many of the nerfs as I did from Majin Bay playing the deck to when I played it a couple of weeks ago. The relevant ones from Duckling's time to mine are Ballistic Bot down to a 0-3 from a 1-3, and Rummage up to 2 mana from 1, which again does mean I will not be able to generate it off of Wiggly Burblefish, which is a big deal. But when Duckling went and won with this deck, Twisted Fate, pick a card, Wiggly Burblefish, they had all already been nerfed, really just kind of showing how resilient this deck was through the ages. But now with everything laid out for you, with the total number of nerfs coming to 7, and the total number of buffs only coming to 1, we are going to run Duckling's winning lineup through today's Gauntlet. So let me go ahead and warn you right out of the gate that this is probably the least clean play I've had throughout this series that I've ever publicly done even. I don't know if it was unfamiliarity with the decks or what, but this is just not a great run from me. But I'm going to start off banning the Draven Rumble instead of either the real-looking decks because Duckling's weakness in my head has some really exploitable weaknesses to aggro, both TF Fizz and Frostbite Foundry. Could definitely get smorked down by something like that Draven Rumble, so with two decks having a shared weakness there, decided to take it off the table. And here I get in what I expect to be my only Nexus strike with a Teemo for the entire game as my opponent is playing an elusive heavy deck. And we're going to start here with what I like to call the Bard Opener counter, where my opponent has Beard the Bellringer and Esmus Breath of the World, so that counter is at 1, as I will play against many Bard decks throughout this run. So let's track that together, shall we, and see how many times my Bard opponents have the Bard Opener. But I get down Puffcat Peddler, which I'm feeling really good about, and I can even take an attack with this here because my opponent's only on 1 mana and playing Ionia. So I get in a free 3 damage, which feels really good in these Puffcap decks. Whenever you're playing a strategy that is reliant on things other than combat damage, so here I'm going to use Elixir of Iron to try and bait out a Twin Discipline from my opponent before I commit a Flash Freeze or a Troll Chant, but instead they just straight up Concussive Palm it. Now, what I would have liked to see out of me, I think, is a Thermogenic Beam onto the Esmus to sneak through an unwarranted Teemo Nexus strike that I shouldn't have been allowed to do again, but instead I go for the Foundry. We're going to skip ahead to turn 6 here as I pass turn 5, my opponent takes the pass, and then this is a pretty bad threat assessment on my opponent's part, in my opinion, where you're playing a deck full of elusives. I don't know why you think getting the Teemo off of the board is a high priority when I have a Puffcap Peddler that is impossible for you to deal with sitting right next to it. And it's going to just sort of exacerbate the issue when I throw down 2 more Puffcap Peddlers here. And then I've just got a handful of Frostbites. My opponent is playing counter spells, but nothing that's going to, no silences or anything like that in order to undo the Frostbites that I'm going to be doing. And now I'm going to go ahead and take my Thermogenic Beam onto the Esmus because I don't want my opponent to be able to diversify their threats too much, but they want to recall it. That's fine by me. Thanks to the play cast change. I don't even remember if Puffcap Peddler was initially play or cast, but I do get my Shrooms into their deck regardless of my Thermogenic Beam not resolving. Then I get down a Chump Lump, and this is just an insane amount of mushrooms about to go into my opponent's deck. It doesn't matter that I don't have the Teemo Nexus Strike to double things up. My opponent gets down a leveled Bard, but at this point, who cares? It just lets me get down Iceveil Archer to turn off the Ahri for the turn, and you're like, there's just so few elusives coming out of my opponent right now, which are really the only thing that I'm afraid of. Now, I don't want my opponent to burst pass on me, so I'm going to go ahead and shuffle in all the Shrooms here. I'm looking at my mana. The only thing I really care about committing is the double Flash Freeze this turn, at worst anyway. Now they're going to decide that they want to take out a Puffcap Peddler, but I decided that, Flash Freeze, Troll Chant, these tools are available to me. I might as well use them to save this. I'm only taking 7 damage here, which is completely fine by me. I'm trying to remember if I use a Flash Freeze just to push more mushrooms. I don't. That's fine by me. So now there's a lot of Shrooms in my opponent's deck. I get to throw down the second copy of the Foundry. And at this point, I think if my opponent has sort of non-elusive attackers, I'm fine to throw away the Peddlers. I'm going to go ahead and copy a Droplet here just so that I can overwrite my Chump Wump with an elusive blocker. I've only got 1 board space to play with because of the triple Peddler and the double Foundry, but I don't think it's going to be too much of an issue. I'm going to throw that Mystic Shot at face as my opponent has an amount of Shrooms that I have certainly lost track of at this point. They deny it. That's no big deal. I'm going to see if I can take an Aftershock kill onto one of these elusives. Just get 1 more threat off the board, get a few more mushrooms into the opponent's deck. What I'm really looking to do is just make sure that I have, I want to say 10 mana for the following turn for the double flash, or for the triple Flash Freeze and the Brittle Steel, but there's actually only 1 Brittle Stealable target on my opponent's side of the field, and that is because they actually did stop my Aftershock, but they draw 4 Shrooms on the first draw, and on the second draw, 2 Chimes and 2 Shrooms is going to be lethal for me. Pretty straightforward. Just a triple Puffcap Peddler will do that. I haven't played a lot of Teemo decks, but, that's kind of the dream, right? And then here we're going to open with Mobilizing, Glimpse Beyond, Cursed Keeper, shuffle away our big Cythria, as I kind of want to get on board a little bit earlier, maybe force my opponent to block with some of their elusives since I can't block them. That's the second time in a row that we have seen the Bard Opener from our opponent, so we're 2 for 2 on Bard Openers. Love to see it. And really, I'm just kind of looking to combo off a little bit here. I fire off the Mobilize, arguably a little bit early. But like I said, I want to just get on board really early and see if I can force my opponent to block with some of their elusives. So I push 5 damage into my opponent's Nexus. They replayed the Esmus. I'm going to draw some cards. I've got some significant attacks here. Drawing 2 more Glimpse Beyond was not my favorite. I really want to play aggressively with my units. My opponent doesn't really have removal, so I'm not going to be able to, glimpse in response to anything. They're going to twin Discipline here. I will glimpse this because, you know, the damage that I'm pushing onto this unit is irrelevant. It's going to lose its twin Discipline buff at the end. They're going to Notify it. Fine by me. I have plenty of more glimpse beyonds where that came from. And I'm going to get to push a little bit of damage, kill an Esmus, and draw a few cards. So all in all, a pretty good turn. I can even use the Oblivious Islander to get the Cythria down a little bit more. And now with 2 Oblivious Islander, I can actually get one of my Cythrias down to 7 mana and play her on my next attack turn while going very wide. Just going to block and Glimpse Beyond, see if we can find a Matron perhaps to just get some of the real nails in the coffin going here. Down to 7. You know, I've got to find lethal relatively soon. I find the Spectral Matron, so I'm going to be able to get a full board with the Cythria and a couple of Oblivious Islanders to try and finish out the game on the following turn, but I do need specifically Matron to connect to the Nexus, otherwise it's not going to be lethal. The fact that I have, you know, a 0 attack unit doesn't feel great for me. So this is the big Cythria Matron turn. If you've never seen this combo happen before, all of my stats are doubled, all of my units have Challenger, and now my opponent, you know, so I line up some attacks here, and what I'm really sort of thinking about here, and one of the reasons that I go for, you know, I'm going to rearrange the attacks here and actually have Cythria kill the 6/8. And the reason for that is it doesn't matter if I put my opponent at 1. I don't have any over-the-top damage, so I'd rather clear out as much of my opponent's board as possible because either my 12/12 is connecting or it isn't. And that is really... Like, if I had switched out the attackers here, they would have taken 10, they would have gone to 1, but I can't deal 1 damage. I'm, you know, pretty much just matroning Cythria for the rest of the game, so that either works or it doesn't. And on the following turn, my opponent plays a Shadow Assassin. I don't have any elusives, I don't have any single combats or concerted strikes. No concerted strikes in the list, no single combats in my hand. My opponent is able to just buff up the Shadow Assassin and actually kill me. So not in love with the way that that game played out, but I think that my attacks were correct. Again, pushing my opponent to 1 does nothing, clearing their board does something. But now they're going to be playing a Phalios, which I'm like relatively confident in this matchup. The double attack doesn't mean much unless it goes down onto Fizz or another elusive, and usually they're cutting down on elusives these days. It'd have to be specifically Fizz. I get a Laurent Protégé down to try to challenge out this Glistening Lantern since the nerf to its health, which is one of the reasons that I kept the card. They get a Librarian. You know, I kind of have to block it, and I figure I might as well just go ahead and Glimpse Beyond as well, because my hand's not looking great. I need some cards that I can actually put on the field. I'm going to kill the Gleaming Lantern because I don't want the problem... There was a change recently where attaching a unit, rather, no longer counts as playing a unit, and it will not consume the Gleaming Lantern buff. Now, I don't know if they fixed that yet, but I really don't want these Gleaming Lanterns to stick around and then my opponent just throws down like 3 attach units in a turn, but their hand is getting kind of low, so I'm not as worried about it as before. Now, I can play Matron into Cythria this turn, but I kind of want to do that in a turn where I can attack with the Cythria and actually clear out more of their board, because my opponent does have a lot of things that I want to try and get through. I also kind of wanted to wait and see what the prank was going to hit. So now that my Protégé costs more, and it is what it is. Everything's going to get Challenger next turn anyway, so it's not like I need to play another Challenger. Because my opponent doesn't know what my deck is, they actually don't go for Gravitum here. I don't know if they just are completely unaware of what's going on or what, but it works out in my favor. So we're going to get our Matron into Cythria combo off very early on here, turn 6 attack. About as early as it ever happens. They're going to Calibrum my Ephemeral 12/12. Now that one I thought was a little indefensible and weird. You know, there's no, like, execute spells in Vandal City Targon, but it is what it is. So I'm going to go ahead and line up a bunch of favorable trades here, try to get as much of my board to survive with 1 HP as possible. I think, yeah, a few of my units are going to do it here. Going to see what my opponent has in their sleeve. Pale Cascade going to trade onto my 8/4. A Pokey Stick, I believe this is, going to make it so that my 8/2 doesn't survive. And I think when all is said and done, their board is clear. I am left with a 4/3 Laurent Protégé. But I still have a Matron and Cythria's in hand. I can even Matron Cythria next turn and then just raw drop a Cythria. And the Fading Memories pickup is actually really great because that's going to let me Matron into Cythria and then Matron into Cythria again on the following turn. But I don't actually have, like, an incredible amount of power on the board in terms of the amount of attackers that I do have. You know, these O2s, they're cool and all, but they don't actually end the game. But because my opponent has a bunch of non-fearsome blockers and I have 2 Spectral Matrons, one of them, you know, 24 attack, unless they have a stress defense again, then this is just going to be game over for them. They've already played 1 copy, and even if they stress defense, you know, I'm still clearing their board, but they don't have anything, so I am able to do what this deck is supposed to do and just knock my opponent for 60 damage here on turn number 8. So, you know, it was a pretty fun deck to play, and it does start me off at 1-0. Following along and trying to ban my opponent's most real-looking deck, I mean, this is Jinx instead of Vi, but it just could still be a Winding Light pile for all I know, so I'm going to go ahead and ban that away. Then I'm going to queue up the Championless Matron Cythria into Luxalawi. We're going to skip ahead the first couple of turns. Nothing really big happens. No Bard curve because my opponent's not playing Bard. It's Luxalawi, Demacia Bilgewater. I'm just going to use all of the health on this Laurent Protégé to take out the Seize Voice. They single combat it with a Tentacle, which I'm not too concerned with. I don't expect the Seize Voice to get any bigger. The only way that this card gets value is by attacking, so I should be able to just block it with the Hapless Aristocrat. That's why I didn't use my single combat in order to ensure that I was killing this Seize Voice or anything along those lines. My opponent doesn't have a Lowy yet, so I'm not like super concerned about this Tentacle growing out of control. This also means that they will not be playing a Lowy this turn. I'm going to mobilize because I had passed when they played the... things are going a little bit faster, but essentially what happened is they played the Petrified Broadwing, I passed, they passed, I mobilize on the next turn, and then kind of see what I can find here off of Stalking Shadows. Get a couple copies of Spirit Leech, get down a Cursed Keeper, back over to my opponent's attack turn. They're going to barrier up that Seize Voice, so my Hapless Aristocrat that's been waiting around to kill this Seize Voice since the first turn, not really going to do anything. I'm not sure if this was the correct play, but I'm a little bit worried about this Lux just making sure that I can never have a board, so I am going to end up committing double single combat this turn to take out this Lux. It's not my favorite play in the world, but it kind of felt like something that I just needed to do, and if they have a second Lux, then I'm kind of screwed from there, but I don't have access to Cythria. Like, all I have is this Matron, so at the moment, I really just kind of need to build up my board and bide my time for a Cythria, and Lux is going to make that a lot harder to do. I'm going to take my block onto my Hapless Aristocrat where I can take it, take a bunch of damage, go down to 3, which is outside the range of Riptide Sermon. That's really what I kind of care about. I draw the Matron, or the Cythria rather, and I'm just going to go for the combo, just to sort of get my 12-12 online and get this Tentacle off the board. I decide not to attack with everything, because my opponent does still have quite a bit of mana to develop, and I only have a little bit of life left. I just screw up my math here. I thought the sharp side would save it. You can even see my face there. I'm not happy about that. It's so hard to do the math on the burst speed spells sometimes. So I'm just gonna, you know, piss away a sharp side and a couple of mana. No biggie. I didn't need that kind of stuff anyway. Then my opponent is going to Eye of Nagakaboros on the attack and just go in for an open attack. If they have sharp sight, I just die. Never mind, they play the Seize Voice, which actually gives me an opportunity to come back into this one because I can find a Wings and a Wave here, which is going to give me a couple of blockers. Because at the moment, they would have been attacked. They would have had three attack attackers. Everybody representing lethal. So I needed to find something like this Wings in the Wave in order to actually get enough blockers out that I can survive at 1. And, you know, if I ever get Riptide Sermon, so be it. My opponent actually decides not to attack, which I think is really weird, considering I don't have any attack points on any of my units. So I'm just going to run out my second Wings in a Wave. And then my 3-mana Radiant Guardian, thanks to all the mobilizing I've been doing. And then on the following turn, I'm able to play my Cythria. I'm still at 3, so I'm not worried about the Riptide Sermon. You know, it's not going to kill me. Maybe if they had attacked earlier in the previous turn, this actually would have won them the game, but they didn't, so I'm fine, and I'm chilling. They don't have any direct damage unless they, like, make it rain, so that just kind of is what it is. But I'm just going to go ahead and throw out my big lifesteal unit, try to get back to 9 HP. I have Nagakaboros. That's fine. I kind of pulled my attacks in a way that I should be able to kill this Tentacle no matter what they do. I'm a little surprised that they didn't eye after combat. I don't really know why they cared about pushing all that damage into my Radiant Guardian, and apparently they don't either because they surrendered as soon as it happened. I don't know if they weren't happy with the draws or what, but we're getting into game number 2 where I'll be playing TF Fizz up against this Lux Ilawi deck. I get down my early Ballistic Bot. It's all well and good. They go for a Tentacle Smash, and I get a hard outplay here with the Mystic Shot and the top-decked Suit Up, so I can't really take credit for all of this. So that's going to kill the Tentacle, then a 3-3 is going to spawn. It's going to battle with my bot, and my bot's going to survive at 1 HP. All of their Tentacles are dead, and my opponent is probably not happy with the position they suddenly find themselves in. I'm going to get down a second Ballistic Bot. I'm just really looking to like level Fizz, go wide with Elusives in this game. The double bot really helps to facilitate that, which is the way that I always kind of preferred to play TF Fizz. It's just kind of, you know, Ballistic Bot for the first few turns, get a big combo turn later in the game. It's kind of how I always enjoyed playing the deck. They don't have Sharp Sight mana, so I'm just going to go in with my Fizz. Probably would have even if they had Sharp Sight mana, if I'm being honest. You just got to YOLO it sometimes. Seize Voice not looking super threatening, but I do want to maintain my Suit Up mana, just kind of after seeing what my opponent goes for. And they Royal Decree in order to challenge my Fizz. And Suit Up not going to get me out of that one as this Tentacle is going up to a 4-4. taking a look at what my options are for blocks here, and I decide to try and keep the tentacle low since they're low on cards in hand, and the Sea's Voice seems to be the only thing that they really have going for them right now. If I can keep those tentacles low, I feel like that's a pretty good avenue to victory for me. I'm going to bot one more time in order to get my Wiggly Burblefish down to 0 mana, and I pull out a Manifest card. Now, Razor Scale Hunter looks correct. I could actually take out the Sea's Voice and leave it over, you know, attack again, but Ravoon has some potential to just really win me the game on the spot if I can find a really impactful Daybreak card, like Solari Priestess is the main one that's sticking out in my mind. Sunburst would also be a really nice hit to deal with a Lux as soon as it comes down. So I can't play the Ravoon immediately because I did play a card to manifest it this turn. My opponent throws down an Alawi. I'm just gonna, you know, throw out my Ignition because I don't want to rummage it. I don't really want to Poro Cannon it right now. Just kind of biding my time. My opponent goes in for an open attack. That's gonna give them a 2/2 Tentacle. It's kind of a big Alawi, but also not really. So I am going to rummage away my Ignition and my stress testing before I decide what my blocks are. And the Twisted Fate lets me notice that I actually have some really good trades to follow up with a red card. So I'm going to snap, line up my units so that everything is left at 1 HP outside of this tentacle, and then just throw down a Twisted Fate's red card to clear out pretty much everything that my opponent has. They're going to Concerted Strike it, which is fine by me. Twisted Fate, I wasn't planning on leveling this one, but you know, it is what it is. And then I'm kind of looking at my hand, trying to figure out, do I want to pick a card this rummage? Do I just want to float all of this into the next turn? My opponent goes for an Answered Prayer, just to get a little bit more health onto their tentacle. Start off with Ravoon, and I pull Morning Light, which I actually am relatively happy to see. You know, it does combo pretty well with this Poro Cannon, so I'm actually really eyeing up this Morning Light, not so much as discard fodder, but as an actual win condition. And my opponent Riptide Sermons my unit. Not super happy about that. Falling down to 7, I decided that I do need to fire off a couple of Daring Poros just so that I have a blocker on the next turn. Again, don't want to fall down 2/2 life or lower against these Alawi decks anymore. My opponent goes for another Answered Prayer, and if there is an Alawi or a... Actually, it has to be Alawi. I would be able to take out a Sea's Voice with a Get Excited. So if they have Alawi, I just lose, but they don't have Alawi. They go in for the attack, and I'm like, yeah, you know, here's a Daring Poro. You can gobble that up all you want. I'll sacrifice it to the sea. And then I'm going to pick a card to rummage. You know, I'm not seeing myself rummaging anytime soon. I'm really just looking at a Morning Light Get Excited finish here. I find an Iterative Improvement, so I'm going to play that onto my Daring Poro before I go for the Morning Light, just to go a little bit wider. My opponent now finds Alawi, just one turn too late for them to try and force us to a game number 3, but I get off my Morning Light. I go in for my attacks. They have a single combat, which they throw onto my Fizz. Doesn't really matter, though. I have the Fizz's Playful Trickster, so even if they had killed, say, my 4/4 Poro, I still would have been able to kill them this turn because I have the Rally, and that is going to take us to a 2-0 start here over this Lux Alawi deck. I always want to say Bard when I say Alawi because there's really not any other Alawi decks, as I've just sort of proven by making a mockery of this one. That's right, my Gauntlet experience against Lux Alawi is universal. Now, whenever I come up against very real lineups like this, you know, the Kai'Sa, the Jaceheimer, and the Bard Alawi, I'm always kind of conflicted because if I lose, it means I have a lot more editing I have to do, but if I win, then I really get to highlight the point of this series, which is playing these older lineups against the modern decks. Now, we're going to count and see if our opponent has the Bard opener. Well, there's one half of it. There's Beard the Bellringer, and I swear to God, if there's an Esmus Breath of the World on turn number 2, then we're going to be 3 for 3, baby, on terms of our opponents having the Bard opener. And guess what? That's an Esmus Breath of the World. We're never lucky. And I'm going to go ahead and Thermo Beam this one because I really want to attack with my Teemo again on the following turn. This is not a deck that has a lot of elusives in it, so as long as I can keep the Esmuses out of the way, then I can actually ride this Teemo all the way home. Going to get another 10 Shrooms into the opponent's deck. A lot of Frostbite effects in hand and not much else going on, and the Hired Gun, not what I wanted to see. Now, I could sort of fight for this Teemo, or I could just let it die. I do have another copy of Teemo in hand, but I would really like to level this Teemo. So I am going to Brittle Steel that and then use my second Teemo to actually get this one to level 2. Doesn't really matter to me that it has Vulnerable. I highly value getting the single double up of Shrooms and then maybe never having a Teemo for the rest of the game. More so than I value letting this Teemo die, playing another one, getting them to 15 Shrooms, and then sort of fighting for my life to make sure they don't have either another Vulnerable spell or a Make It Rain or anything like that. So while my Teemo may still be vulnerable, I did what I came to do. I got the 30 Shrooms into my opponent's deck, and they're just continuing to go kind of spooky here. But because they didn't really respect my Teemo, they don't really have anything to respect my Teemo with. They only have 2 attack units to go in with. Now, I'm trying to remember why I sort of go for the Troll Chant double up on the Teemo and the unit that was hitting the Teemo. I believe I was trying to play around double Tentacle Slam because they do have an Alawi in play, and Fury of the North would get me outside of the range of double Tentacle Slam if I have the extra 2 health from the Troll Chant, as well as taking no damage from my opponent. So I'm going to use it here to dodge a Riptide Sermon, which is not what I was playing around. Otherwise, I would have had the same amount of health. My opponent finds another S-Miss, so I'm unable to get through a Teemo hit, but I find Hexcore Foundry, so now I can actually start to make my opponent draw the shrooms that are in their deck, as well as hopefully draw some more shrooms of my own, and my opponent finds the third S-Miss Breath of the World. All three sort of elusive units in their deck have been found while I'm trying to actually play for the Teemo game plan for once in my life. So I'm going to go for a block here. I'm going to Flash Freeze onto the Alawi. I'm going to live it too, which is not an ideal breakpoint. You know, I am in that Riptide Sermon range, and we'll just kind of have to see if our opponent has it. Can't play around it, so we'll do what we can. I'm going to throw down a Puffcap Peddler. They're going to Hired Gun it. That's fine. I'm going to Iterative that. Just get more shrooms into the deck. You know, there's already quite a few in there because I have gotten a leveled Teemo Strike onto the Nexus. Zap Spraves in. That's usually a 1 or 2 of, so all 4 elusives found. No more Teemos for me for the rest of the game. Not that it really matters at this point until I draw a Teemo, and I'm very sad. But that's okay. We'll see what my second draw is. Elixir of Iron, not great. And with my opponent down to 6 with a Foundry and 2 Puffcaps on board, I'm really just looking to get as many shrooms into my opponent's deck as possible, so we're going to fire off an Elixir of Iron, then the Veteran Investigator. I am dead if my opponent gets to attack me, so they're going to Tentacle Slam. I am going to just fire off a Brittle Steel to get as many shrooms into the deck as possible, and pray that 2 draws will deal 5 damage to them. That's kind of just the level that we're at here. It's out of our hands at this point. We're going to hit that pass turn button and see what happens. First draw, 1 Chime, 1 Shroom, not great. And then 5 shrooms off the second card, and we are 1-0 against Bard Alawi. I was not expecting that. You can kind of see it on my face there. That was a lot of shrooms. It felt pretty lucky. So going into game number 2, Jace Heimer up against our Cytheria Matron deck. What I'm just showing you here, I lose this game. What I'm doing is showing you how many cards I draw. So here's me Glimpse Beyonding. Wow, 2 draws. I find another draw card. Let's play that draw card. What do we find? Oh, it's another draw card. It's Spirit Leech. What happens when we play that Spirit Leech? What do we find, everybody? It's 2 Cursed Keeper. You'll notice I don't have Cytheria or Matron. I finally draw Cytheria, whence I have the Matron on turn 10, but it's on a defensive turn, and my opponent has elusives, and then they Vengeance to get a second MK6. I don't have any single combats, and that is the end of the game. It wasn't a particularly interesting one. I didn't have a lot going on there. So we're going to skip ahead to game number 3, where I keep double Mobilize and Stalking Shadows because it just feels correct, you know? And we're 4 for 4 on the Bard opener. My opponent once again gets Beard the Bellringer into S-Miss Breath of the World. I don't know if Riot's got me playing on hard mode or what, but I think I've beaten every Bard deck that had the Bard opener, so I don't know how much, I don't really know how to take that one. But we're going to Stalking Shadows. We find our Cytheria. You know, we don't have a Matron just yet, but because we have the double Mobilize and the Oblivious Islander, doesn't really matter. Make sure we line up the Islander onto the one that is already ephemeral. Our opponent plays Alawi, just to really pressure the Bard curve that they had here. Attack with this ephemeral, because it was going to die at the end of the round anyway. Get our 4-2, and see what we can ride out from here. Our opponent gets a very big Alawi. We decide to block everything, push some damage onto the Alawi, throw down our Radiant Guardian. Haven't found a great time to mobilize yet, and my opponent is starting to get very wide. I'm just going to go in for an open attack with the Radiant Guardian because they don't have any clean blocks for it, and I just want to get my life total back up there. I have a single combat to take out this Alawi at any point that I want to, so I'm going to mobilize, and I'm going to play my Cursed Keeper, just to kind of see if I can get more cards out of my opponent, maybe get them down below Alawi mana. They go for a Tentacle Smash instead, and I just kind of let that happen. You know, I'll get my 4-2 out of it. And they're still at 4 mana, so I don't really love the fact that I have to go for this kill onto the Alawi now, but I feel like I have to. My opponent goes for the Bard spell, and that actually levels the Bard, so I'm a little worried that the second round of Chimes is going to come and actually buff up the Alawi, but it doesn't happen. So I get to kill that, and now suddenly the Tentacle, not as much of a threat, but they have another Alawi on the following turn. It doesn't matter as much to me, though. You know, I'll play out a unit here, just get some blockers developed. I'm at 20, so I'm not really worried about, like, randomly dying this turn, or at least I wasn't until they played that Tentacle Slam. I decide that I probably want to keep this Tentacle a little bit smaller, keep the Alawi from just blowing my face open, so we're going to single combat to take out the Tentacle in response. They're going to get a 3-3, but that's better than an 8-7 or whatever it was about to be. And then we're just going to Spirit Leech to draw a few more cards. And next turn, we've got the Matron online, so we're looking pretty good. Just have to survive this onslaught, and I look at all of this and I say, you know what, I'm not killing anything if I throw out blockers here. I have this Matron play on, or this Cytheria play on the following turn. I really just need to preserve my unit, so I'm going to go ahead and just take 14 damage here. You know, the Alawi's going to level, but it is what it is. It's their second copy. I plan on taking that out with the Cythria anyway. And then I line up my attacks here, and they might look a little weird. What I am trying to play around is Eye of Nagakaboros, because if I go at the Alawi with the... or if I go at the Tentacle with anything but the Cythria, then an Eye of Nagakaboros would get it out of the range. And they actually Eye of Nagakaboros after I kill everything. And they only draw one Chime, so it was more correct for them to wait on it in this exact instance. Then they go for a Cosmic Binding here, which should push 4 damage, but I don't want to fall down to 2 because of, you know, the Riptide Sermon. So I Sharp Sight to preserve my unit. I go down to 4, that's fine. I get down a Radiant Guardian. I get down a couple of other things. I think I actually fire off the Mobilize after I played Radiant Guardian. I don't know if I forgot it was there or what. Like I mentioned earlier, not the cleanest play in the world by me on this run. But we're going to go for Summoning a Prey, see if we can push through lethal next turn. Our opponent's going quite wide, so it's unlikely, but at the very worst, we are going to get 8 health back from our... I decide to skip on the Oblivious Islander there, and then I'm looking at my opponent's board, and I'm saying I'm not sure that I'm killing them, so I should probably just gobble up more of their board, although I think I actually would have had lethal if I didn't give them an extra sort of instance of priority here. But I don't think it matters too much, because I'm going to be able to clear out their entire board. I'm going to gain back a bunch of life from the Radiant Guardian. Maybe I didn't kill them on the turn that I was supposed to, but I don't think it really ends up mattering. You know, they're down to just a couple of cards. I draw a Sith or a Matron so that I can Matron into Cythria just to get some highlight reel stats on board and then push, you know, a casual 80 damage into my opponent's Nexus. And that is going to... is that the series? Yeah, that's the series. 2-0ing Bard Alawi. No Bard in the last lineup does mean that we are 4 for 4 on Bard openers this round. I hate that. And I'm just going to go ahead and ban the Swain Caitlyn here. A little worried about Flash Bombs. I'm a little worried about Fearsome in general, and I think a Swain hit would be much more devastating than this Spider deck that I don't think is Spider aggro because it is an Annie. I'm much more likely on this being Catalog Conservatory, which they go hard my Teemo turn 1. I did this to someone when I was playing Push P's lineup, so I know how satisfying it feels to be able to go hard at Teemo turn 1. Just going to take a, you know, a little freeze onto the Elise here. Makes it really hard for them to attack me. And I think that I'm actually feeling pretty okay here with the double Puffcat Peddler because, you know, they need to expend a lot of cards to actually deal with the Puffcat Peddler, and they don't have a lot of cards in hand. Generally, they're not going to be 1-for-1ing on this. They need to 2-for-1 on it with like a Flock or a Disintegrate and a removal spell. So I lose my unit there, and Elise is going to level, which is a little bit of an issue, but I'm not, like, insanely worried about it. I get down in Ezreal. I'm not really worried about, like, the exact damage from the Elise. This Vile Feast is going to make things a little bit more of an issue because I really did value getting both that Mystic Shot and my opponent not having 4 spiders, my opponent only having 2 spiders. So now this leveled Elise is actually looking in a position where, like, it might just run away on me, which I don't love. And now I'm evaluating my Flash Freeze options. I could Flash Freeze the Elise, but I think I want to keep one of my Puffcat Peddlers healthy, since that is... Because of my hand state, all I really have is draw for both players, so I feel like I need to preserve both Peddlers. If they had, like, double Flock in hand still, and I lost both Peddlers, that would just be the end of the world, but instead they actually do end up with an Arachnoid Sentry as well, so I'm like, ah, nuts. So I'm going to play out my draw guy here. They get a Conservatory. I'm really just trying to bait out Tibbers. I don't want to play Teemo because I really want them to play Tibbers, and now I'm in a situation where I can't play the Foundry because if I do, then they're free to Tibbers. They Tibbers here. I Troll Chant in order to get this Elise a little bit lower. They Ravenous Flock, and I, like, try to defend it, and it still dies, and then I'm actually just exactly dead to Tibbers and Annie. So not, you know, the math not really working out for me on that one. The leveled Elise and the Massive Spiders made it pretty difficult, but I'm feeling better about this game. Up against Thresh Alawi, in case you forgot what this one was. So not really sure what to expect from my opponent. You know, I haven't seen Thresh Alawi before. I think it was a deck like day 1, but everybody kind of fell out of it. But I'm pretty familiar with the Tentacle package like this. You know, just a Tentacle Slam onto my Teemo. I don't really feel like saving it with a Troll Chant and an Elixir of Iron when I just have a second Teemo in hand, and I know that there's not going to be any elusives coming out of my opponent, barring maybe a Zap Spray Fin. They go in for an aggressive push. I'm fine to take the block there, baby. I got no problems with that. I'll play with the health on this Puffcat Peddler. I got Elixir of Iron, and you're not playing Noxus anymore. No Ravenous Fox coming on me, and this Azrael should, again, be pretty free to hit my opponent and start to clean up the board a little bit. I decide to take that Mystic Shot and aim it up at the Tentacle rather than killing a unit, because I want to make sure that this thing doesn't get too out of control. I have a second Mystic Shot in hand, so I can just kill this at the start of the next round. But my opponent has other plans, as they answered Prayer to buff it outside the range of that Mystic Shot. It'll go up to 4 health at the next round. And then they Buru Lookout on open, so now it's up to 7 health, and I'm like, man, this thing's getting really hard to kill all of a sudden. Play my draw guy. If you haven't noticed by now, I've completely forgotten his name. Gonna Troll Chant here to save a little bit of damage rather than saving like health on my Ezreal, because I do still have the Elixir of Iron. So that's really kind of what I'm looking at for there. I play Teemo. My opponent says, hey, here's a Withering Wail. Now, luckily, I drew the third Teemo as this happened, which is going to give me the opportunity to level this Teemo and then use the Elixir to preserve something else. In this case, Ezreal. Because I feel like my Puffcat Peddler's really done his job. I'm going to get off this Teemo Strike. I don't think this Teemo's going anywhere. And I do still try to, like, I still need to try and get this Tentacle down into a manageable range. So I really want this Mystic Shot. Although I am questioning whether or not it's better to just throw the Mystic Shot at face. But because the Tentacle's only got 5 health, I still feel like I can kill it. You know, even if I just have to block it next round. I feel like it feels killable. You know what I mean? I've got 3 attack units. It's only got 3 health. Here's another Investigator. That's his name, Veteran Investigator. They draw a Shroom. I've got a blocker for the Tentacle. They start off the turn with Thresh. That kind of sucks. You know, I have to Icefield Archer the Thresh rather than the Tentacle because I really can't afford to lose my Teemo or my Ezreal here. They play another thing that's going to buff the Tentacle, so not in love with that. And then they just answered Prayer again. So just outside of my Mystic Shot range yet again is this Tentacle. I'm able to take a full block here. Just clean up some of their units. Nothing crazy. I'm going to get another Mystic Shot off of this Ezreal, which combined with the Mystic Shot in hand and a block, maybe I still have an opportunity to take out this Tentacle, but it's really getting up there in size. I'm a little bit worried about it, and I've actually just kind of completely forgotten about Atrocity as a card at this point. It like hasn't even really crossed my mind, so, you know, maybe I would have Iceveil Archered pre-combat, but that's not really the case, right? Because I'm just kind of... I need to save this Iceveil Archer for, like... I can't use it to play around Atrocity unless it's the turn that I'm winning the game is kind of what I'm trying to get at in a roundabout way. Now I'm really deciding, like, should this Mystic Shot go face? Should it go at my opponent? I think my Ezreal's at, like, 5 out of 8 here. I've kind of given up on killing this Tentacle. My opponent has done such a good job of pumping Answered Prayers and Buru Lookouts into it that it's just not going to happen. The Sea's Voice... a little bit scary, but now I get to Iceveil Archer a Tentacle. It's no longer a threat. I'm not going to randomly lose the game to that one. Now my opponent sort of, you know, screws up with their Thresh here, pulling it to the front. It's at 4 out of 6, so it would have leveled if they really wanted it to. But I guess they felt like they needed the Hallowed bonus to play around Elixir of Iron specifically, because Troll Chant, this doesn't get around Troll Chant, but it lets me Mystic Shot it, and that's going to level my Ezreal. It's going to make it so that the Thresh doesn't level because it dies first. And now I just have this leveled Ezreal and this Puffcat Peddler to try and ride home here. Going to draw 4 Shrooms for my opponent, and I'm going to draw 3 Sisters, and this is where the Atrocity comes in, but I get a very timely 3 Sisters top deck, meaning that today is not the day that we will be losing our first Seasonal Championship Gauntlet Ducklings lineup saved by the top deck Flash Freeze, in a deck where I think I like main deck 3 Flash Freeze, and I haven't seen any yet, so statistically I was pretty likely to draw Flash Freeze there, but they Vengeance my Ezreal in response. Very rude. But I do... you know, still have a bunch of Shrooms in their deck. They draw 3 of them. I draw another Flash Freeze, so I don't have to worry about... I'm not even sure what. I always feel Archer the Eye of Nagakoboros, and they spend a minute thinking about their life after I do that, and then we end the turn, and they die to Shrooms off the top of their deck, because they have a lot of them in there. And now we are up 1-1 going into game number 3. Going to have to play Cytherea Matron against this Thresh Alawi deck, or we would have if not for the fact that our opponent was actually apparently so tilted by the Flash Freeze that they did go ahead and disconnect. We've seen this bug before. It's happened like every run. I don't even think it's a bug. I think it's just my opponent leaving the game. But that does actually get us the win and the prime glory with Duckling's lineup. Call me Wendy's, because we're 4 for 4. Now, I'm not in love with the fashion in which it should happen with our opponent AFKing or disconnecting at the end. I still haven't quite figured out the cause of that bug. I assume it's that my opponent hits exit client, so I think it is like a legitimate win. They got tilted off of a Flash Freeze onto an Atrocity and just quit the game from there. But, you know, I was really worried about this one. The Frostbite Foundry, it got dicey there a couple of times, but it did ultimately pull it out. And the Matron Cytherea was a lot of fun to play. I'm actually relatively happy that I only had to play Twisted Fate Fizz 1 time, because I've already played that deck through the Gauntlet, so it was nice to get to play the more sort of interesting decks out of Duckling's lineup, but so far, yeah, so far so good. And next week we will be back with another clickbaity title, as Mr. Emotional was the champion of the next seasonal, which is Rise of the Underworld. So I'll be playing his lineup through the gauntlet, triple aggro, which lately the meta has been shifting more and more towards an organic anti-aggro state. So I'm a little worried about that one, just because, but you know, it's the gauntlet. It's the gauntlet. I can probably smork people down in the gauntlet, right? Tune in next week to find out. I have been Boulevard. Thank you so much for watching. And yeah, next Monday we will have Mr. Emotional's winning run with triple aggro.